Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easy for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and I'm so excited about the guest that we have here today. He is one of the best known and best respected men in town. He is a local legend who comes from, quite frankly, a legendary local family, folks that for multiple generations have been community leaders, community icons, if you will, and somebody that I have always wanted to get to know a bit better. So with no further ado, I bring to you Mr. James Square. Mr. Square, how are you doing today?
I'm fine. How are you, Parker?
I'm great. Thank you so much for making time. And I know you got here right after school. I know you probably had to scat real fast. And I can't wait to talk to you more about all that you do over at the junior high. But before we get to that, why don't we begin with you just telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay. Well, first, thanks for having me. Where do I start? Background. Well, I'm from the Square family, and it's amazing, even as an older adult now, that people automatically, even last night at the Bloomer Bowl, they're asking you to go, hey, you're a Square, aren't you? Because I look just like my dad. My brothers, we look just the same. My sisters look after my mom. So it's a physically recognizable family. And even
well, anybody who's ever seen me and my brother Bree could say the same thing, right?
I mean, of course.
Don't all the Layrisson boys look just alike? No, but you're right. You have a distinctive look in your family, and it's a good thing. You're lucky you have inherited your father's looks, and that's fun. So so your family's been around here for a long time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your parents? I know they were both very prominent in the community, and thank God your dad's still with us. Tell us about them and the impact they had on you and your life.
Sure. Mama is originally from Springfield. Daddy's from Hammond. And they kind of met through church, because church is a very, very important element in the Black community.
What church did they meet at, Mr. Square? I'm sorry.
Now, here's the kicker. It wasn't the actual church itself. It was they shared the same pastor. So the pastor of my dad's church in Hammond was also the pastor of my mom's church in Springfield.
Okay.
So that's that connection there with those two communities.
And who was that pastor? If he was covering two different cities, that's like Pastor, Samuel Brown these days. I know does the same thing.
Yes.
You have to really have quite a following to pastor two churches. I'm just curious who that was.
Now, when I say this name, folks, they're going to have to dig back in their history to remember who this gentleman was. It was Reverend Watt Mixon. He was the pastor at Galilee Church out in the Haynes Settlement in Springfield, and also Greenfield Baptist Church in Hammond. So Daddy's from the Greenfield family. Mama was from Galilee. Daddy went in the Air Force when he's about 20. Needed to get out of home, out of Tangipahoa, grow up and be his own man. Daddy's the oldest of 10 kids in his family. Mama, there's only 2 on her side. They kind of met at a funeral, and here's the deal. Daddy's first wife passed away, so he's on leave and he's visiting family and everything. And because of that church connection, somehow even before that, my grandparents and great grandparents, they all kind of knew each other in the community. So here's that winking and blinking. J.D. Square is winking across at Erling Walker, and this is springtime. He's getting ready to go back to base, and he says, "Well, I'd like to come courting if I'm ever home again." Comes home Thanksgiving, proposes, they get married Thanksgiving Day.
Oh, so, wow!
Just somehow somebody upstairs put those things together for
That's an amazing love story. A few weeks ago on the show, speaking of the military and great men of Ponchatoula, we had Mr. Reggie Peavy. And his late wife, Miss Aresta, was one of the most beautiful and wonderful women to ever walk through Ponchatoula. And he told the story of how they met and how he literally proposed to her within 24 hours of meeting her. And here you are telling us another great, fast track marriage love story with a great happy ending and a wonderful family to follow. So thank you for sharing that. That's a heartwarming tale there. Well, what were they like as parents? I mean, that's their love story. And please continue. I don't mean to cut you off.
No, not
but I really would be eager to hear what it was like to be raised by two such great folks and kind of how that shaped you as an educator, a father, etc.
You want to hear how we were raised? We were raised in a very strict religious, very strict military family.
Uh-huh.
My sisters and I, we were born in North Carolina on base. Older brother Mark was born in Tennessee on Air Force Base. David, our younger brother, he's the only one of us that was born here in Tangipahoa Parish. Uh, our household, if you're familiar now with Airport Road, I
Uh-huh.
call it Ponchatoula. I know there's some Facebook junkies out there. That's where Ponchatoula is. That's what Mama used to call it.
Okay.
It was a place where we were very loved. We were very well trained how we were to walk in this life as kids, so we could walk this life as adults. Here's one of the things that I think is a little funny anecdote is back then you didn't have cell phones or instant communication. We had that old time party line, and I would always be the one
For the young folks listening, Mr. Square, if you wouldn't mind, please explain what that was, because that's lost on folks that are under a certain age.
Okay, so what the best way we can explain party line, it would be like if you did a conference call, like I called you, you want to call somebody else, and you press that merge button. Except you didn't have it back then. It was just you just kind of just tapped just right on the receiver, and you were in on somebody else's conversation.
Right. Yeah, you just kind of had to click a little bit and you were in.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah.
So and that form of communication was instant in its own way because if I had decided to be just a little bit mischievous at school, and and sometimes that happened quite often, my mom would be at the end of the driveway or the carport waiting for us to get off of the bus.
Uh-huh.
And just by her stance, you could tell, okay, Ivan, because they call me Ivan at home. Ivan must have done something funny at school today.
Is Ivan a middle name, or where did that
That's my
come
middle
from?
name.
Okay, just making sure you weren't Ivan the Terrible or anything like that,
Well, I just go by Ivan the Musical. I figure I'd be safe.
Okay. You never know where these nicknames come from. That seemed unlikely. If you would, now seems like a good time for me to jump in here and share a comment of our mutual friend, your very dear friend and colleague, Mary Beth Crevetto, who was following along there on that. And she says she knows another man with a fast track love story. Mary Beth, thank you for tuning in. And Matt Cox here says, "Hey, Papa Square." And as I understand it, you and Mary Beth Crevetto have a very close and symbiotic relationship at the junior high. She calls you Papa Square. Maybe you call her Mama Crow. Can you tell us about that dynamic duo while we kind of have Mary Beth up here on the broadcast?
Sure. Now we go back even to the high school when she was the assistant principal at the time, and I had finally moved back home and become band director there. And probably after about a year of being there, we could just kind of see that, okay, here's a guy that really cares about kids. Here's a lady on this campus that's the mama to everybody, and she's going to love them and tough love them if she needs to.
Right.
Just on campus, kids come up with little nicknames, and I'd heard, they were saying, "Well, here comes Mama Crow. You better get right." And then they're on their way to my class, and
right.
I'm in trouble, and I'm counseling them in the hallway. Look, you need to turn your day around and get right.
Sure.
She passes by, and she says, "Yes, thank you for talking to him, Papa Square." So those names have just kind of stuck with us over the years.
Well, it's kind of cool to see that out in the community, and of course, Matt Cox is calling you Papa Square here. He's the first guy to post it in our comments. Yeah. And Matt and I grew up together. We played baseball together. We've been friends for decades, and a great guy there. And so it's kind of cool to see that. Folks, if you are watching at home, and I can see here we have literally dozens of people watching live as I say this, you have the ability to post a comment. So if you've got something to say, post right down here below, and we will do our best to bring your comment up during the show. If you've got a question for Mr. Square, if you're an old friend that wants to say hey, if you want to compliment him on the job he's doing, we try to keep it positive here. So please don't go complaining. If I doubt you have a complaint, but if you do, save that till later. It's not that kind of inbox, but we can share your comment. Miss Faye, thank you for tuning in. You're one of our most loyal listeners. And she makes a great comment here, Mr. Square. And I'm going to read these to you or do my best to paraphrase because I know you're looking at a little phone. And if your eyes are yeah. But Miss Faye says she can hear in your voice what a great upbringing you had. And I think that's a neat comment because I would say that's dead on right. Marjorie Brown here says, "Oh, occasionally you were Ivan the Terrible." Uh,
And she would know firsthand, Parker. That's my little sister.
oh, little uncle and me, Miss Marjorie. Thank you for tuning in to watch Big Brother in action. We're so glad to have him here. So, Mrs. Square, getting back to your childhood, I interrupted you, and for that, I apologize. But I'd love to hear about more because I can see from your little sister's fun comment, I can hear the love in your voice. That while it was strict, and thank God you had that military and religious, backbone to kind of guide you with values. There's a scene I'm just hearing and sensing a lot of love there. And tell us more about that what it was like growing up in that family, and we just love to hear more.
Sure. Getting back to Ponchatoula, Ponchatoula, it's a busy road right now.
Uh-huh.
When we were kids, it was basically the country. So my brothers and sisters, we didn't live here in town. We lived out in the country.
Right.
And we lived a country life. Daddy was an airman for a long time, and his dream was when he would retire, he would start farming. And it wasn't until I think I was eighth, ninth grade. No, I was going 10th grade before he retired.
Right.
Daddy kind of figured, okay, before he gets another promotion, he needed to come home and spend some years with us before we all left the house.
Sure.
Our upbringing. And trust me, even when he was away and overseas, he was always present there at that house. There's no doubt about that.
Well, I'm eager to hear about his farm and what Sergeant Square was growing there, you're telling us. But let's talk about his career. He was in the Air Force, and I know that's going to impact your moves in life, and we'll hear about that. So tell us about what he did and how he served our country in the Air Force.
But sure. If Daddy was sitting here right now, he would tell you he served 24 years and 7 months in the United States Air Force. And you could name a year, and he could pretty much tell you what his missions were, what aircraft he was assigned to during those times. Daddy was a loadmaster on C-130s. That's a propeller-driven cargo plane. He was in one of the first loadmaster classes in the late 50s, and pretty much spent all of his career C-130, C-119, C-123s, anything that had to do with transporting troops or equipment. In fact, he will sit in the yard. A lot of people see him out in the yard at home reading the paper, and they said, well, he looked like he was just gazing at the sky. He watches aircraft. That's his pastime.
Oh, that's
he'll
cool.
Look up and he'll see those contrails like way high, about 30,000, 40,000 feet. And he'll say, okay, well, that's B-52 is probably doing training missions from out of Barksdale. This one's heading down the East Coast. So, even though he's been retired from the Air Force since the 70s, trust me, Sergeant Square is still in the Air Force.
Sergeant Square still got it. And I bet he can identify different aircrafts by the sound, too. I mean,
he's losing that hearing. And
yeah.
If he's listening, it's already shot, but he can tell. Here's something interesting. He just turned 90 back in February. So we called it This Is Your Life party, a little joint party with my son, Joseph. And one of the highlights for me was when we had some C-130 footage in his slideshow. So we told Daddy, we don't think we can get you down to base anywhere and get you in the air on a 130, so we're going to bring a 130 to you. So, he's listening to the party and everything, and it's going on. And as soon as he heard the sound of those props start to wind up on that 130, he was sitting there at attention. He put down his fork, stopped eating his cake, and he was just fixated on the screen. And about 30 seconds later, he just starts narrating everything that he did on C-130s in his career. Even after the party, we're sitting on the porch till almost midnight, and he's still telling military stories. And it's
that
like,
is so
look,
cool.
If you go get into bed, it's like, no, wind him up, let him go. Let's hear this history.
Wow, that's neat. 90 years. What an amazing generation. And what a blessing for you, your family, our country, and especially our community to have him, in our lives that long. That's just amazing.
Yes, sir.
Well, tell us, while we're on the topic of your father, Sergeant Square, his amazing career in service to our country. And I'm going to ask you more about your childhood, and I love to hear what it was like growing up. But I also know that you went to the Air Force Academy and chose that direction. Tell us about that, if you don't mind. And of course, where it got its origins, presumably in your father's career. But tell us about your own decision to go the Air Force route and what that was like, please.
Sure, sure. The Air Force Academy. Wow. Here's how I first found out about it. 7th grade here in Ponchatoula, when my generation, Perrin was the junior high school.
Okay.
And about that time in 7th grade, this would have been toward the end of the Apollo missions, and space shuttle flights hadn't quite come online yet. Well, NASA, of course, they're having this big public promotion tour, so they're getting astronauts out in communities all across the country to talk about this growth in the space program. An astronaut showed up at our school, at Perrin Junior High School, and
wow.
This was Frederick Gregory, and what caught my attention was here's a black man in military uniform, in Air Force blue, but he didn't have any stripes on his arms. It's like, okay, I don't think he's an NCO or sergeant, anything like my dad, but he had 2 gold leaves on his shoulder, so he's an officer rank, he's a major, and this gentleman starts to talk to us about space exploration and the space shuttle coming online in the next several years. Would have been very early 80s at that time. And one of the things that struck me was when he opened up the floor for questions, and someone said, well, where do you go to school to be an astronaut? How do you learn to fly? And he mentioned these words, United States Air Force Academy. Now, Daddy's already in the Air Force, and I want to be in the Air Force too. But when he said that, I think I probably sat straight up and my ears perked up. We didn't have the internet or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah, you couldn't Google it. Yeah.
No.
You had to get all the information you could while you could.
That's right.
That would have been the last time an astronaut passed through Ponchatoula. Yeah.
But just trying to find out everything I could about the Air Force Academy. And then later that summer, right as we were getting out of school, of course, on the farm, we had to get up early in the morning. And we're watching the morning news, and there's a segment on graduations at the Service Academy. So here's West Point graduation ceremony, Naval Academy, and there's Air Force. And I remember just being glued to that old black and white set. And my mom was kind of watching me, and she said, you think you'd like to go there one day? I said, yes, ma'am, I want to go to the Air Force Academy. And then from then on, even to this day, I just, some part of me lives and breathes Air Force Academy every day. It was quite an experience just getting there. And then the 2 years I was there.
Let's talk about that, because most folks know this, but some may not. Getting into a service academy like the Air Force or West Point or the Naval Academy, that's like getting into an Ivy League school, right? Now plus much more, but academically what I'm saying is you've got to have Harvard, Yale grade type, as I understand it, to go. So, did that strengthen your resolve to make good grades? Were you already doing that beforehand? I mean, tell us about that process from junior high, this explosion in your head that the academy exists, to getting in and actually going. Tell us about that process.
Sure. Let's talk about those grades first. My worst grades were in penmanship, and if you look at my penmanship now, it's questionable, but I make it work for me. Grades were an expectation at our home, even if it wasn't said every day. And I tell kids here at the junior high, and I love them to death. Of course, a failure just was not going to happen. That just meant there was a total breakdown, and my parents would put together any mechanism so that would not happen. C's were kind of okay, but I heard the conversation that my mom and dad had with my older brother, Mark. When he made an occasional C, and it's like, I do not want to have that conversation with them. And if I brought home B's, well, there was going to be, a talk about that. It was, okay, is this the best you can do? All right, what are you missing? what do you need to do to gain more knowledge? It wasn't to make a better grade. It was, what do you need to do to gain better knowledge? And the best days is if I just brought home that all-A report card, and thank God I did that quite often. I just got that nice nod and a smile from my dad and my mom. You know, she, fix me a little peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Wait, if I may interrupt quickly,
Yeah,
speaking of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, we've got Miss Joanne Tierney tuning in, who says that she and Coach Hank love you, and they say that you're so missed at the high school, and this is awesome. You're such a blessing. And I just mentioned that because a few weeks ago, NFL player, Arizona Cardinal Reggie Walker was on this show, and he was giving a plug to her PB&Js and how they got him through 2-a-day practices in the summer. So, Miss Joanne, if you're still watching, thanks for tuning in. We would love to get you and Coach Hank on the show too. But I just had to throw that PB&J plug out to you because you're the legendary now all the way to the NFL. But please continue, Mr. Square. Sorry to interrupt with that.
Oh, not a problem at all. And Coach Hank and Miss Joe, hey, how are y'all? God bless y'all. And we'll talk about this more, just how much of a family we were over at PHS, and it continues all through all of our Ponchatoula.
Yeah.
So getting back to the Air Force Academy,
right.
Trying to take that rigorous academic offering at school, it was quite a challenge because sometimes it didn't quite fit into a schedule.
I bet.
And I think Mr. Buscus, I don't know if anyone out there remembers Mr. Buscus. I couldn't actually fit in the trig class, but he would bring.
Was he a math teacher that also taught at Southeast?
We had him for science mostly.
Okay.
And some math.
Okay.
And he would help me out, and Miss Kevlin, good Lord, she mentioned calculus, and there are a few mornings she would grab and just, okay, if you really want to go to this Air Force Academy, let's talk about this thing called derivatives. And I'm so glad she did, because I was a lost puppy when I got up there with friends that had taken so many more advanced courses than me. But what I found out is that they wanted to go to the academy, but they didn't have quite that drive and that ambition that I had since I was a younger kid. But anyhow, you go through all of your academics. Then there's the physical portion of preparing for the academy.
Sure.
Being able to do pull-ups, push-ups, running, just everything to show that you have some endurance, some upper body strength.
Right, because you're not just a college kid; you're an Air Force airman, right? I mean, you're in the military. You've got to do it all.
Yes, that you are a triple threat kind of at the academies. Of course, it's all about academics, but then it's also about professional military training, and then there has to be some growth of you as a person physically. So you are in some kind of intramural sport if you did not do intercollegiate. I was fortunate that I maybe from getting in trouble at home with my older brother, I was an intramural boxer for a while. And,
cool.
And I always, I had a horn on my face playing something, so I was very blessed to be able to earn a spot in the Flight of Sound. That's the Drum and Bugle Corps at the Air Force Academy.
Okay. Well, please tell us about that, and maybe if you will, we can do this now, later, or whatever order you want. We're going to dig in, obviously, into a lot of band talk, right? And beginning with your career and how you got started in music. But for now, let's leave that big story before and after behind and tell us what that experience was like, in the Air Force to be in that elite unit.
Ponchatoula may have had just a little over 4,000 people in town at the time when I graduated from here and went to the academy. The cadet wing itself was about 4,400 cadets. So there are just as many cadets studying to be military officers as there were people in my hometown. So we talk about a culture shock. One of the things that I am so fortunate that still part of me is just the ability to endure what some people call hardships. Being gotten out of bed at 2 a.m. and saying, all right, get dressed in this uniform and you're outside pitch black and they're asking you knowledge questions. You're doing calisthenics, push-ups, all kinds of things. And then you got to get back in bed and get your tail up and get your room ready for inspection before you head out to academics. Then after academics, it's time for that intramural and intercollegiate growth.
Something tells me growing up with Sergeant Square and a strict Baptist mama helped you prepare for that. Am I wrong?
I was prepared. Yes, put it that way. Yes. Not quite where I needed to be, but boy, did I have a good foundation for it.
Sure.
The other thing with the academy is just learning how to connect with other people. You cannot get through the academy experience by yourself, for yourself. If you don't understand team building and leadership growth and youth development, then you're not going to last there very long. It is a wonderful place. All of the service academies are.
Right.
They're very, very tough to get into. They are going to, they're funded by the government. You know, you are a GI while you are there.
Right.
So you owe it not only to yourself, you owe it to your town, to our country, to do your very best while you were there. Unfortunately, I had some health problems, wasn't able to finish out my years in the academy. You talk about break my heart that I was not going to be able to be an Air Force officer. Of course, I wanted to be a pilot, but
right.
You know, I can see where I am on the screen. I can't read much. But
well, that's a very common outcome, and I'll give you an example. One of my closest friends in the world is a city councilman near Des Moines, Iowa. His name is Joseph Jones. But like you, he came from humble Louisiana roots into the service academy and went to West Point, but he blew out his knee. And if you can't make it physically, because of the rigors of what the soldier's life is, you can't finish. So it's a true honor to get in there, but it's not like, average college where, if you get into LSU and you got tops, you got to blow it pretty bad to lose that and wash out. You could just get misfortune medically and be out of there. So can't imagine how hard that was on you. But I saw one of my closest friends go through that and how tough it was on him. And we just did our best when he moved down. I was at Tulane at the time, and two of his best friends were there. We did our best to make him comfortable with beignets and beer and all that goes into lazy boy college life. But I know that was tough on my pal Joseph, and I'm sure it was on you. Well, we're going to circle back to the next step after that. But before we do, if you don't mind, I'd love to get back into your childhood and talk about your foundation musically, because you've talked about the military foundation and family life, and share more about any of that if you like. But you're this gifted musician who's now teaching musicians and has been for decades. Tell us about how that got started. When did you know you were interested in music, and what sparked the fire?
Sure. Sometimes we want to emulate our older siblings, and Mark and I have always had a love-hate relationship, and now that we're adults, we've gone through that.
Right.
You said gifted, and you probably saw me, kind of like, yeah, right. Mark is gifted. Margie is gifted. All of my brothers and sisters. Now, Lisa, she'll tell you her gift is playing the radio. She never really learned to play, but she can hear and she can tell you if it's right or wrong. And she has so many other good gifts and skills in other important areas. But Mark, he's just gifted. God said, okay, look, Mark, you're going to be a gifted musician. When he got to me, he says, I think I'm out of musical gifts, but I'm going to give you a work of tenacity. You're going to want to do things, but you're going to learn how to work hard at it. And I tell people that, I'm not all that gifted, but I'm talented enough to know how to work my gifts. And it's
you're maximizing your potential.
Exactly. And it comes from that upbringing that we had at home, that work ethic and that focus on goals. And especially talking about family and music, you don't find this in many families. Now we have an old piano at our house. In fact, Daddy and I are talking about getting rid of it. And I told him, no, I'm going to make a cabinet and put in my house.
Right.
But that piano was already beat up when mom and daddy got it for us. And I remember the struggle of getting it in the front door and putting it in the living room. And it is still in that very same spot where my dad, my uncles, and a couple of them put it there. But Mark took piano lessons, and he was a fast learner. Mom and dad.
Do you remember where he got his piano lessons? I'm just curious in Ponchatoula.
Yeah, sure. Here's the church connection again.
Okay.
Out in Springfield, of course, our grandmother, Miss Alberta, we called her Coop. She could play piano, but the piano player at the church was Miss Ruth McGee. And if there's some Springfield people watching, you remember Aunt Ruth. You know who she is down on the lane next to my grandma and grandpa.
Okay.
Aunt Ruth gave piano lessons, and Mark would take lessons from Aunt Ruth and also in band here in school. So he is a very good music reader and would practice all of the time at home. Well, when he would practice, because like I said, Mark's gifted. He doesn't have to practice a lot. It was me that had to practice. but mom and daddy would, when daddy was home, and it was usually Christmas time when he had his biggest leave from the military. But we would gather in that living room, and we had those old Reader's Digest treasuries of songs. And even more than that, we had the Armed Forces hymnal, Baptist hymnal, Methodist, whatever church books mom and daddy could get for us. And we would sit around and we would sing songs together as a family. Lisa would, she'd join in and sing. She has a beautiful voice, didn't play any instruments. Mama wasn't so much of a singer, but boy, she had a good ear, and she could tell you if you were here or there, where you were in the harmonies. And she was always one of those that when it came time for us in band, she made sure that we practiced. Mark practiced. Me, I worked hard at it. And I got put out of the house because I played tuba.
Okay. That's going to be interesting to hear about. So what I'm hearing, though, is despite Mark's prodigious gifts, he didn't just rest on his laurels. It sounded like he worked hard to maximize what he could do with that gift. Is that right?
And let me tell you, now Mark does practice, but Mark can look at it and go, okay, I need to do this, this chord there, and we're going here. Me? Well, no, I got to sit down. I got to study.
No, look, I can relate to what you're saying in a very different way. I'll give you an example. My brother Bree and I both have very pretty wives, right? I probably had to work a lot harder to get mine than he did. God just gifted us differently, right? So that's neat that you guys had such different paths and that you appreciate kind of where you fall in the pecking order talent wise.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so you played the tuba. It was that. Yes. I don't think most kids start at the tuba. I know when I washed out in band at St. Joseph's School in 1 year, so I never got past the clarinet. But did they start you on a smaller horn, or did you start with brass? Or tell us about your journey to get to the tuba.
Okay, so there's that connection with Mark again. Okay. Mark was already playing trombone in the Vineyard Band.
Okay.
Mark's a couple of years older than I am. We all had the same band directors growing up. So Miss Barsnick, Peggy Barsnick, started Mark on trombone. Mark played in the 5th and 6th grade, goes over to pair in 7th grade. 5th grade, it's time for me to decide if I'm going to be in band or not. And I figured, well, heck, if Mark can play in band, I'm going to do it too. Well, we had one trombone in the family. So what Miss Barsnick would do, she would get the trombone. Mark would bring the trombone on the bus. And then when he was done with junior high class, she would bring it over to Vineyard, and I would play the trombone in the afternoon beginning band class.
Well, you guys would be popular at the Layrisson house in 2021 because, Trombone Shorty has written a great children's book. I don't know if you know this. It might have even won the Caldecott medal or some type of award, but it's a great book, and my kids love it. So nobody in my house can play that instrument, but if they knew somebody like you that could, they'd be into it. That's cool. So that's how the trombone gets in the mix. When does the tuba enter the conversation?
Okay, so when you're low small James Square and you're in the 6th grade, and there are 7 or 8 trombones in band, and you're about in the middle of the section, you figure, okay, I'll practice every night, but I'll just be, an okay trombone player.
Right.
And Miss Barsnick had an old baritone horn, in the corner. It was all beat up, tarnished, little torn leather case. And I actually said, well, what's that? She says, well, that's a baritone. And we talked about it a little bit. And she said, well, the baritone is the tuba's little brother. I said, okay, well, what's the tuba? So we talked about it, and she described that the tuba would be probably as tall as I was at the time. I was like, well, that's it. I'm playing the tuba. She said,
Nice.
oh, you're not quite big enough. So God bless her. She said, all right, you take this baritone home. The music is going to look just like trombone notes, but now instead of working your slide, you have to figure out valve combinations. I was like, oh, okay. And then when you get a little bit taller, you can play the tuba. And she was a very smart music teacher. She didn't send me home with a baritone book, knowing that the end result was that I wanted to play tuba. She sent me home with a tuba book so I learned to read down in the lower register for tuba. So thank you for that, Miss Barsnick. And that's something I've always done with my own.
Miss Barsnick was peeking around the corner for you. She, preparing you for what was to come, not just what you had that day. It looks like Marjorie has shared this with Peggy Barsnick. So hopefully that family can tune in and hear you talking about her. Marjorie also says, don't forget that gospel pearl. Tell us about that.
Oh, Lord, yeah. Well, I'm glad she mentioned that. The gospel pearl, that was kind of like the standard hymnal of our church when we were growing up. And what was cool about it, and I didn't really understand this until I was in college doing music theory, the gospel pearl has a lot of Moravian shape note music in it. So the shapes of the note heads tell you the note values, and you look at other notation tells you if the pitch goes up or down. So yeah, the gospel pearl, if you've got one laying around somewhere that you don't know what it is, call Papa Square. I'll add it to my book collection because it is a treasure. Yes.
That's great. Well, let's share a few other comments because a few other folks are chiming in on how great you are. Patricia Vicknair says that you've got an awesome family. And Michelle Lott says that we love Mr. Square. So, ladies, thank you for tuning in. We sure appreciate your comments and your viewing. And anybody else who's there at home, if you've got a question for Papa Square, fire away, hit us up with a comment. So we're talking here with James Square. We're talking about music and childhood and how he got to the trombone. Tell us about what's next. What's the next chapter in your story? You've shared so many mentors and influences in your life. Who else were the important people in your childhood, and kind of what came next?
Okay. Well, let's talk grandparents.
Okay.
Then we're going to talk music teachers and other teachers.
Great.
My grandparents out in the Springfield area. Everybody knew my grandpa as Alice, Mr. Alice Walker. Wonderful man. He was one of the coolest cats that you could ever meet. If you saw him on Easter Sunday and you wanted to know what it meant to be debonair, his picture needed to be in a dictionary because he would be threaded from head to toe.
That's cool.
Wonderful man. My grandmother was Alberta Walker, Lillian Alberta Walker. Some people just know her as Miss Alberta. We called her Coop. That was her family name for us. And another really good family that was part of our upbringing was the Satoon family out in Springfield. My grandma Coop was their housekeeper. And the Satoons, they loved our grandma. They called her Tub. And there was nothing that they wouldn't do for Alice and Tub. And for my mom, my Aunt Winnie, and all of us kids when we were
Now, were they related to the Satoons of Ponchatoula? Because in my generation in the '80s, there were a million Satoon boys that all running around in every direction, and it's a real popular family. One of them's been Strawberry King. I mean, you name it. Is that the same clan, just one town over? Do you know?
Yes. You know what, Parker? We could probably go back and see where that family branched out because all those Satoons, they're off of that same bloodline somewhere. Yeah. And
I'm glad you mentioned the relationship. You mentioned your grandmother being their housekeeper and how close they were and how genuine that love was. And it reminds me, now it's probably been a few months since we had Sharon Brown Carter on the show, but our grandmothers are very close friends. Her grandmother was housekeeper to my grandmother. This would be Inez Layrisson and Nell Brown and Miss Nell and my grandmother Inez, they loved each other, you know, and it was just, you know, you'd see these relationships form. And of course, it was a very different time, a very racially fraught time. But it is neat to kind of hear about the genuine love that two families can have for one another, kind of stemming out of that relationship.
Yes, sir. You know, Mama passed away back in '09, and we were out at the church in Springfield for her services. And it was years since I had seen any of the Satoons. When Miss Ruth and Catherine and Jackie came into the church, you know, ushers are trying to find a seat for them, and we were like, "Oh no, they're family. They come up here with us." You know, that's just
Right.
how close our families were, and it wasn't.
That's like it was with us. Miss Nell Williams, she's like a member of our family. We were so tight, you know.
And
and here we are, generations later. You know, Sharon and I are still buddies. Look, you know, sponsoring each other's kids when they do stuff, and you know, helping each other with jobs and all that. And it's kind of neat. It's just neat to see those traditions passed down. Speaking of passing down traditions, our friend Matt Cox says that Matthew Jr., his son, has learned a lot from you. And hopefully after he finishes college for music education, he can be like you. So that's a heck of a legacy. I'm eager to get into your teaching career, and we can get there whenever you want, because I know you want to talk first about the teachers that mentored you. But once we get there, know that we're going to want to talk about what it's like to see these kids, you know, want to become you one day and do what you do. But why don't we use that as a offering? Who inspired you in that way, and who were your music teachers when you were a kid?
Sure, we're going to get to that. We're going to let me talk about the square grandparents here.
Oh, please, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, we just covered one half.
Yeah, my grandmother was Margie Square, Miss Margie over on Mooney Avenue. That's where my Square grandparents lived. And Mama had 10 kids. So when us first cousins got together, the younger bunch of us, I have like 35 first cousins. And
that's a big crew. That's a business crew.
Yes, it is. Yeah, because Daddy was the oldest of 10. Mama was the oldest of 2. So that Square side's real big over there. Mama worked at Southeastern College, they called it at the time, before it became SLU. And she worked in the kitchen. But not just in the kitchen, everybody kind of knew her on campus, and she had real good influence just with students in that arena. Our grandfather, Phonics D Square. Now, Parker, if you've been in Hammond on Railroad Avenue, you know where Phoenix Square Road is?
Absolutely.
Okay, so in City of Hammond, maybe one day they'll correct it, but his name is misspelled on the roadside. Phoenix Square Drive is named after our grandfather, Phonics Square. So his name has no.
We got to get that rectified. Yeah, we have to figure out what district that's in and get a city council on that. Yeah.
Now, I do have an Uncle Phoenix, one of my dad's brothers. His name is Phoenix, but that's Phoenix.
You think he's going to push back on this? Or I don't want to cause any drama in the family, but
we'll be fine.
It seems like the right thing to do is to get the right name up there.
That's right. Yeah. So that particular street is named after Pawpaw, and it was one of the things that the city of Hammond did even back very late 70s, early 80s, was to understand, okay, we've got to start to recognize diversity within our community.
Sure.
They thought it would be important in some of the historically Black communities. Let's rename some of these streets and city properties after them. So it was the choice between naming Mooney Avenue Park or a street after our grandfather. It's like, well, everybody knows there's a Mooney Avenue School, Mooney Avenue Park. So somehow him and my grandmother decided, all right, we'll take a street. So they named that street. It's Phoenix Square Drive. It's actually Phonics Square Drive. And here's an address for you, Parker. 1600 Phoenix Square. That is the address of the African American Museum here in the Hammond area.
Right. Well, of course, that's why I knew the street immediately when you said it. Yeah. I've been there.
Yes, and we want to encourage people to take a trip through there, because it's not just African American history. It's our history, and we need to share that with everyone. We're finding out, especially now that I'm doing a lot of 8th grade Louisiana studies, if we could get kids out on a field trip, that'd be one of the first places we want to take them to learn some of our local history. When we start talking about things like Reconstruction, Jim Crow,
Right.
the civil rights amendments that first came out of the Reconstruction period, and how that
Right.
plays into today's.
What I've done here, Mr. Square, since you brought
Sure.
that up, is I've brought up on our screen access to the Tangipahoa African American Heritage Museum website, which I believe is taahm.org. And
Yes,
it's
sir.
got the address there, it's got the hours, admission price, etc. So, folks, if you're watching, please take this to heart. It's a great website. There's a ton of information on there. I've had some fun time there, from black tie events to second Saturday breakfasts. It's a great facility. And thank you for sharing that, Mr. Square. Anything else you want to offer about that place, or how folks
Please.
can make use of it? Because it's a
Yeah.
quite educational, tour. I mean, we should all do it and check it out.
You know, when we talk about tangent tourism and commerce, you know, but we just need to make sure that people understand that it is a first-class facility.
For sure.
Plenty of room for conventions of some kind or seminars. So please, folks, make use of that wonderful facility over there.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That wasn't expecting that in our interview today, and I'm glad you did that. So this is it's neat hearing about your family and the history. You know, 2 great families, 2 cities, one giant, one small, and that they kind of came together, and that's kind of where you come from. Are you ready to talk about music teachers and influences there? Or is there anybody else in your family? Is there, because in a big, with on one side 9 aunts and uncles, are there other folks in your family you want to talk about before we kind of move on beyond grandparents? And
Sure. Let's talk about my in-laws.
okay,
I'm single again, and that song, "All My Exes Live in Texas." All that
great tune.
She's back home near her family of origin in Texas, and
Okay.
And Parker, let me tell you, I love my in-laws. I don't know. I think they know it. We don't say it enough in words, but our actions as family. They love me like their own kid. And
That's cool.
I couldn't ask for a better set of folks to be my own kids' grandparents, besides my dad and my mom. Here's one of the things that is very interesting. My wife's ex-wife, she's Caucasian. And here in the South, you get a lot of looks and stares, and that's one of the things that we will continue to grow through as a nation.
Sure.
But my in-laws, you talk about evolution. They had some reservations very early on, but I think once they understood my commitment to family. And it's just like Dr. Martin Luther King said, let's not look at the color of the skin, but let's look at the content of the
character, right?
Yes, and Charlie and Betty, man, they're just so wonderful to me and to the kids, to the whole family. When my family split, it's like, well, I got to take the kids to grandma's house. I need to go find a room to stay here for a couple of days for the holidays. And I said, man, they were just beside themselves. They thought they had done something to hurt my feelings or do wrong by me. It's like, this is the family home. This is where you come to. You stay here when you're in town. And it just meant the world to me that, that my family is that tight and that close. And like I said, it might not be a lot of spoken love, but boy, the word is there in the action from the heart, and that's important.
Well, good for you for putting that out there. And I tell you what, it speaks to not only the content of their character, but to yours, that you can maintain such a quality relationship now that you've entered the X's in Texas, stage of life, because that's tough to do. Anybody with family knows that's difficult. And I think, you're right. You highlight a good point about this issue that racially we have so much room to grow. And the South has historically been a tough place for that type of relationship. One of our prior guests, good friend of mine, Marshall Grays, has lived it in the latter, decades here, in the 90s to present. And we still have a long way to go in 2021. Thankfully, I think we are making progress, too slow, too little. But it's neat that you share that. Speaking of folks in Texas that love you, Mary Beth Cravetto's daughter, Mariana's on here. Says she misses and loves Papa Square. She learned so much from you, and there's so many great memories. And I think Mariana's in Texas. I could be wrong. I'm sure Mary Beth will jump on here to correct me if I am.
Oh, she will.
We've got some other great comments on here. Danny Dunn says to Mr. Square, please tell Miss Cravetta not to break up the third hour teacher tag team next year. And she says thanks for helping. He says thanks for helping out this year. We've got is this Miss Wan, Charlene Wan? Wan, I'm sorry. And she said the pleasure of working with you, that you have an amazing rapport with the student body. And you go beyond for everybody you come in contact with. She tells a story about working with a homebound student that you're passing in the halls and ask for help with the instrument, and you give an extra time. She says, and I quote, that you are simply an amazing man. So that's pretty neat. Thank you for sharing that. It's so neat seeing this love pour in. So let's get into it. Teachers, let's talk about a career in education. We've talked about music and what it means to you and where it came from and your talent for it, and folks like your brother with greater talent for it. But one thing no one can deny is you have an amazing talent for teaching. And we hear that from your colleagues. We hear that from your former students, parents, former students. Who taught you? Who inspired you to become a music teacher one day? Where does the whole educational angle of James Square come from?
Sure. Okay, wow. Let's take it all the way back to when we first moved here from the Air Force Base, and it was time to start school. And they'll still quote me at family reunions that I was the one that did not want an education. I already knew enough. Of course, that's a funny story, but it's like, okay, so I'm the professor in the family now.
Right. It's funny for you to tell now, years later, for a dad with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old that's getting that when I go home. It's tougher to take in the moment for the parents, right?
Yes, it is. Yes. Influential teachers, I could just run a laundry list of them. But here's some that stick out. And these aren't all just music teachers. If anybody remembers Mr. Riley Wilson. Riley Wilson was a math teacher over here at Perrin. He taught 8th grade math. Mark and Lisa, my older brother and sister, had already had him. And I remember the first or second day of 8th grade, I wasn't going to have Mr. Wilson for math. And he came out on that playground and he just said, young Square, little Square. He didn't call me James.
Little Square, I like that.
Oh, yes. Square. He said, you're going to be in my 5th period class, and I have a desk for you right up front near me. And, I'm trying to plead my case with Mr. Wilson. I'm not in your class, and he wouldn't have it, any of it. So there I was, 8th grade, front row, not even the front row, but right next to Mr. Wilson's desk. And
right.
Mr. Knighton for science, for the Hawk, I'm sure the Clegg boys remember him. Those teachers, boy, they were tough. And looking back on it now that I've taught, several decades, one of the things that I didn't realize at the time that I realize now for me is that younger kids need to see me in the classroom. They need to see
absolutely
this demographic. They need to see professional Black male teachers. And I'm just
amen. Absolutely.
Just put it right there. Now those gentlemen were tough on me back then, and I praise them for that. Now as an adult, and one of the last things I said to Mr. Wilson, saw him at one of Mama's birthday parties in Hammond. I went up to him and he called me. Well, come here, young Square. You look like you want to talk to me. I said, yes, sir. And here I am, a 40-some-year-old man, and talking to my teacher. I said, Mr. Wilson, I want to thank you for making me take your class. He said, what do you mean? I said, I didn't want to take your class. He said, no one ever wanted to take my class. He said, I saw something in you, and I knew that you had in your mind there were things and places you wanted to go, and I just felt math could get you there. So yeah, you're going to be next to my desk for that year. Made all A's in math that year, and not that I'm that brilliant mathematically, but just Mr. Wilson was that kind of
it's
teacher.
Speaking of great math teachers and the importance of strong black male role models in school, we had Trey Muse from DDC Reeves here to talk on the show a few months ago, and he's doing great things, but that same element is still in play. I mean, I don't know the stat on what percentage of Ponchatoula students are black boys, but it's so important for them to see that level of success and professionalism and work ethic. And like you said earlier, when you met that astronaut, to see yourself in that position, right? Mm-hmm. So that I mean, I love that you bring that point into play, because it's true today, probably as it's been. It's so who else was a big influence to you? Because that's a strong one to start with.
Yes, I would have to say Reggie Peavy.
Oh, Mr. Reggie.
Everybody.
One of my best favorite interviews yet was getting Mr. Reggie. Boy, speaking of folks like Sergeant Square, Mr. Reggie, also a veteran of Greatest Generation, in his 90s, like your dad. What an amazing man. Tell us about him.
He knew my folks from way back. He in fact, him and my dad, they need to go drink coffee or do something together. So whenever I see Mr. Peavy, I always ask about, how's Sarge? How's he doing?
Yeah.
Just that camaraderie between those two gentlemen growing up, and just watching that evolve over the years. Because growing up in that turbulent time, not everybody thought that people should be friends with people that didn't kind of look like them. So I'm glad that there were some forward-thinking people in our town, in our generation, that passed those values on to us. So Reggie Peavy and I have to say, my uncle AJ Bodker, you've got to.
Yeah, what a great man. I had the pleasure of having lunch with him today at the Rotary Club.
Oh, well, good.
Good to see him doing so well. We shared some fun stories. My dad came as my mother's guest. The dad doesn't come to Rotary that often, and probably hadn't in a year. And it was neat to see them catch up. But you're right. Yeah. AJ Bodker is a true Ponchatoula icon.
Oh, yes, sir, he is. One of the key things I learned from him is perseverance. And he said it to me several times, and I actually went home and looked it up in a dictionary, because we didn't have a Chromebook or a phone back then.
But you couldn't just ask Siri what that meant?
No, couldn't do that. Couldn't do that. And and because he had said it so often, and just in his visits with me, I figured, this is a key word. I need to make sure I understand what this means. And after I, understood, it's like, I know exactly what this connection is between Mr. Bodker and I now. And even as I've gone away, taught, come back home, we pick up that same connection. When I came back here as a band director, he knew that how much I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. And when we started getting letters at home and even at school addressed from Colorado Springs, and it would be to the principal or to the counselor, he'd bring me in the office and say, so what is this about? And he knew how important that was for me. So thank you, Mr. Bodker and Diane Richardson, because you couldn't get on the phone as a counselor or on a computer as a counselor and send an email to the academy. She would sit down and handwrite and type these letters to congressmen, to senators, to the academy board. So thank them. And it wasn't just, them, Tommy Robertson.
Another great legend.
Yes. She and Mr. Lee, Clarence Lee, God bless him, he's passed on. They knew that I had a gift for gab and for fact, so I went to rally for them in civics and in American history, and made it to the state level. So thank them very, very much for that just good foundation in government, in history of who we are as Americans and as Louisianians, because it's so important for me today, teaching, especially here on the junior high campus.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Well, I also know you had a special relationship with Mr. Eddie Pons. Why don't you tell us a little bit about him while we're talking about legendary local educators?
yes, sir. Now, I never had Mr. Pons as an actual classroom teacher,
Hmm.
but he was one of those gentlemen that reminded me so much of my dad. Even if they weren't there on an everyday basis in your life, on that
Right,
campus, you knew Mr. Pons was there and he was looking out for your best interest. And I'm
right,
not saying Mr. Pons just said, oh, we're going to make it easy for you. It's like, no,
right.
here's a challenge and you're going to step up and meet this
Sure.
challenge. And here's some help that you might need on that journey. So
Yeah.
thank you, Mr. Pons. And Mr. Pons, man, just the things that he has done over his
True role
lifetime
model.
here
Yeah,
in Ponchatoula.
for sure. For sure. Absolutely. Well, we've kept you an hour, and I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to wrap up a few loose ends here.
Sure.
And so let's talk about. We've talked about these great educators in your life and what they've taught you. Tell us about your approach to teaching, because when I see this trail that you've left, and look, we only see, a brief part of your career, the Ponchatoula portion. You taught all over, but tell us about your approach and your philosophy and kind of, what it means to you to be a great, give us the how. We've talked a lot about the who and the why, but tell us a little bit about the how you reach these kids and make such an impact.
Oh boy, Parker. Let me see if I can encapsulate it here. Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder has a beautiful piece, "A Time to Love," and one of the lyrics in there it says, "It's not about the religion, it's about the relationship." And I think that kind of might sum up
Yeah.
what I would think it would be my overarching philosophy of education. It's not about me being the band director, the award-winning band director. And trust me, we've got a lot of stuff on
Yeah.
the. We need to go knock the dust off of a lot of the trophies.
Sure.
And Mary Beth, she's heard me say this so many times to kids, and parents can say it like Matt Cox. The trophy that we are trying to earn is that kid's heart and try to do something with that kid's life. So it's not so much about coming back with a chest full of medals and having to build another shelf on the wall. It's building young people.
Right.
So I think that, and it wasn't always like that with me, but it comes to a point when you mature as the teacher, that it becomes not just a job, it is a vocation. In my family, Parker, everybody's an ordained ecclesiastical minister of some kind except me. My mom asked me one time, this is about a year before she passed away, she said, okay, I've been meaning to ask you this. When are you going to answer your call? And I knew exactly what she was talking about. And I said, Mama, look, I'm not going to be anybody's pulpit, preaching the gospel, because I preach too much of the gospel according to Square in my classroom. So I'm not an ordained preacher, but I am an ordained teacher. This is my vocation in life. So even after I retired a couple of years ago, my sister Margie, she's a retired teacher too, and she's a band director. And she said, "Oh, this isn't going to last long. You're going to be back in the classroom somewhere."
And as usual, Miss Marjorie was right.
Oh yeah, she always is. Yeah.
Right.
My little brother David, he calls me Big Brother. He says, Big Brother, you're not going to sit at home and drink coffee on the porch and read the newspaper with Daddy. He says, you do what you have to do, and you get back where you belong. You go back in the classroom somewhere. So it's that calling that I have to answer, and it's all about servant leadership. Mary Beth and I talk about this all the time.
Right.
If you think leadership is a title, or it's something that you're just going to hang on the wall, or a badge you're going to put on a name tag somewhere, you need to rethink it. Leadership is about your abilities and what you can do for others.
Sure. Yeah.
I tell my band kids all the time.
It's more go giver than go getter, right? I mean,
that's it. Yeah.
you reap what you sow. You gotta give first.
You have two hands for a reason. And I tell the band kids, they probably tell you this Friday night sermon, one of those hands at one time or another can reach everything on your body. So one of those hands is there for yourself. What do you do with that other hand? You need to reach out. You need to help somebody. So you
Yeah.
need to find where your talents are, where your vocations are, what are your gifts, and use those hands to share those gifts with others. That's what education is all about. It isn't about just
Absolutely.
collecting titles and putting on the wall. The root of the word education is that you share, and that means to share information, to bring somebody else along.
That's so well said. And I can't thank you enough for sharing that. I mean, it's amazing. I want to bring up a quote here,
Sure.
a comment from Miss Joanne again, Tierney. And she talks about your philosophy on education and how it's not enough for you just to love the kids. They need to know they're loved. And that echoes what we heard just a few weeks ago from their student, Reggie Walker, who's now in the NFL. And, he said with Coach Hank and Miss Joanne, he knew they really cared about him. They weren't just using him to win football games on Friday night. And look, he's not their first NFL player, and and hopefully it won't be the last. But they're not just trying to get kids to the league and to play in the SEC and all this. These kids need to know that you care about them and their futures. And Mr. Square, you clearly do. I mean, it's evident in every direction. And we can't thank you enough for that. Matt Cox here with another quote here. He says, speaking of building a child, if you're in the band room and the kids are talking, he said all he had to do is give you the look. The look, I get a kick out of this because we've seen the look. Folks, I'm going to try to pull up the picture here if I can find it. Give me one moment.
This is not the look they're talking about, Parker.
Oh, no. Tell me about the look, because I thought the look
not the big toothy grin.
Tell us about the look.
Okay, the look, and somebody was asking me today, they said that they need to learn how to do the GNS. It's like, what are you talking about, the GNS? He said,
so this is not the look right here.
No, that's not the look. No, that's not it. It's the glare and the stare. I'm going to see what you're going to pop up here with. I was one time, at school. And this is a while back, and they were looking for my attention step. That's the first thing you're supposed to do when you come in the room as a teacher. And they said, well, we never heard you say anything, and you just started teaching class. It's like, well, they got my attention step. So I think that's where the look comes from, and the look goes something like this.
Oh, that's perfect. I love it. It's also been called here by Michelle Lott the square stare.
Glare.
I like that, man. The square stare or the square glare. We need to get it. It's a shame I'm not a trademark attorney, or I'd hook you up because
there you go.
Some of these. Your classmate here, Darren Bennett, talks about what a fine man you are, and a lifelong neighbor and friend. Darren, of course, speaking of friendships, our families go way back, and our daddies, I think, played football together at PHS back in the day. And his son and my little brother were buddies growing up. Great Family. Mr. Square, we've asked you so much today, and Miss Joanne Tierney says you need to come back for another hour, and I agree. Okay. We're gonna try, if we can get him to agree to that, we will circle back. But until then, us being an hour in, why don't we close up with what else you might want to share with our viewers? And this is wide open. It can be advice to students and aspiring teachers or community servants, just whatever. But if you would, what else do you have to say to our viewers?
Sure. I'm going to talk about something that's real close to my heart here. Let's talk about autism for just a little bit. And
Thank
I know
you.
We're out of time, but
no, we've got all the time in the world to talk about that.
And it's something that I can talk, and I don't know everything about it, but boy, have I lived it for the last 24 years.
Right.
Janice and I, we have 3 kids. Jacob is my son. I don't like to use the word stepson because when I first saw that kid and I put a diaper, one of those pull-ups on his head, I put one on too. Jacob's been my son all this time. Love him to death. Joseph is my firstborn son, and I have a wonderful daughter, Jillian. Jillian was born on one of the worst days in our country. She was born 9/11/2001. So we can talk about the experience of having a kid that morning. We can do that another time. But just touching on autism, if I know there are a lot of Facebook junkies out there, and you see me post a lot, different, not less. Joseph is very different. He's very unique, and every autistic citizen that you are going to come in contact with or encounter in your life, they're all unique. They're all different. But trust me, folks, they are no less valuable, no less capable than anyone else on this earth. The challenge with autism, at least for me as a dad, is not so much what Joseph can't do. Like he can't tie his shoes, but okay, we get past that. We work through that. But at his age, when all the kids were, tying their shoes, and the teacher says, "Okay, when you see how agile you are, can you stand on one foot?" Well, he's, big boy. He's pogo sticking around the playground. That. So a lot of different characteristics there. Being Dr. Bob Butler, that's another big influence for me. Bob Butler sat me down one day when we were home visiting, and he says, now James, you have to understand how much of a challenge it's going to be to raise Joseph. I said, well, sir, I'm figuring that out. And he said, don't ever stop figuring it out, because when you think you know it all, and Janice thinks she knows it all, that's when Joseph stops growing. And that has stuck with me all these years. And one of the things that we have to understand is that what people know about autism, at least at that time, big movie was Rain Man. Now, trust me, Joseph's got some Rain Man type qualities. If you think of my friends, you know what 4:07 on the watch is like on a Friday afternoon. He has grown so much from that, and the things that we've been able to put in place. Joseph does not like the word consequences, but he understood once I, really had to find some way to get his attention. Joseph is very aware that he is an autistic. When we are driving on our road trips, that's when he has his big conversations with me. And one day he just grabbed me by the shoulder. We're on I-49, and I drive like a pawpaw, so I wasn't speeding. And he grabs me and says, "Dad, did you know that I am autistic?" And I'm thinking, wow, how do I have this conversation with my son on cruise control as we're driving? And I was like, and I knew it was going to come at some point, but just to sit back and say, well, Joseph, can you tell me about that? What does that mean? And for him to express that and put that into words, it was a very different driving experience. But then in the conversation, for him to already know for himself, well, it's okay to be autistic because that's who I am. And cool. It just lifted a big burden off of my shoulders and Janice's too, and the rest of her family. It's like, okay, he is aware. How can we become more aware and be better advocates for what he's going to need in this life? So, I just wanted to spend a little time on that, and I hope that we do have a chance to come back and visit about that some more, because it's not just my family.
Yeah. I would love that. And may I ask you a question? Because, my wife is a licensed clinical social worker who works in the school setting with many autistic kids and other kids too. But she says something, I probably get it wrong, and I may hear about it. But, something to the effect of, well, if you've met one autistic kid, you've met one autistic kid, and that's it. You said they're different, right? And the spectrum has a lot of different functions. But tell us, what can those of us like myself that don't have my wife's training or the personal experience that you and your family have, what can we do to support the autistic community? The folks themselves, like your son, but also the family members like you. I mean, what can we do to be better neighbors and friends and citizens to the autistic community?
Sure. The first thing we have to do, Parker, is just treat autistics as you want to be treated. Just go back to that golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you.
Right.
Past that, one of the things that you need to understand that, like you said, if you meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, you've got to open yourself up to understand some of that person's characteristics and their qualities. Figure what those strengths are, and then what can you do to help them. One of the things that we had to do recently, I had to have the police talk with my kids,
Sure.
in light of everything. And this past year, when it was at its height, I had to figure out, how do I explain and have this talk with Joseph? What do we do if we are in East Texas driving to grandma's house and we get stopped by the police for whatever? If there's a light out on the truck, how do we make sure we come to a good end for that conversation? Joseph is very, very protective of me. I'm pretty much his safe person in the world. Everyone says, "Oh, he's just a gentle giant. He's a teddy bear," and he is most of the time. But when he is most upset and just needs to have not a tantrum, but just a total autistic meltdown, I think he feels safest with me and his mom doing that, especially me, because you just have to let him get through that. But I've been concerned, will law enforcement or others understand that if he feels that I'm threatened somehow and he goes into protection mode and he becomes what they think is belligerent, how is that going to end for us? So I had to very carefully, figure, how do I have that conversation with him? And knowing that that's a different conversation that I will have with my daughter or my students here at school who are so-called on the normal spectrum.
Right.
What can I use as examples and life experiences so he will understand that? And he's a lot smarter than I think he is sometimes. So in the middle of the conversation, he just stops and says, "Okay, Dad, so this is what you're saying. This is our procedure." And I said, "You're right, bud." And that's like, once again, okay, he understands. So it's that level of awareness and understanding and thinking outside of the box, because that's what they do. And each box is different because each autistic person has their own uniquenesses or proclivities, as we like to say sometimes. And it's not that those are weird or anything, it's just who they are, and we need to accept them for that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's so insightful. It's so helpful. And I hope folks take that advice to heart. I'm going to do one other thing before we close out, and that is ask you, both on behalf of yourself and the Ponchatoula Junior High Band and your alma mater band, Mr. Bro's doing a great job at PHS. How can we as a community in Ponchatoula better support our bands, junior high, high school, etc.? What can we do to help out?
Okay, all right. Oh, where do we start? Let's start in the educational setting first. I would like to see somehow that we get a music program started back here at St. Joseph's, an instrumental program, because a lot of those kids go on to the high school.
Right, I'd love to see that.
In the public school system, Wendy Savarino is doing a knockout job over here at Tucker. Every kid has a music lesson with her at some point during the week, but when we get to the 3rd and 4th grade campus at DC Reeves, there is not a set music curriculum on that campus. And I might step on some toes here, they know I already do it. We've got to get music programs up and running at DC Reeves, and let's look east of town out here at Champ Cooper. That school is about to explode, and I know there's going to be some new construction there. And one of the first things I did was got in touch with our school board members. All this new construction, they said, "Oh, here's our floor plans for it." And my question was, and they knew it was coming, where is the music and arts room? Where are we going to teach kids music instrumentally? Where we're going to have vocal music? Where we're going to have visual arts? Where we're going to have theater? So I think that's one of the big things that we can do, not just here in Ponchatoula, but all over Tangipahoa Parish. I'd like to start here in the Ponchatoula system because we've got a lot of good things in place and going already, but there's some things that need to be tweaked. I'm very interested in getting things going in Champ Cooper because where's all the expansion? Champ Cooper. I would like to one of these days, if I would take a day of retirement, just go sit out at the bus stop of some of these new housing developments, and I want to do a head count and see just how many kids are getting on that bus that have a clarinet, a trumpet, You know, if it's a tuba player, well, they got a mouthpiece player in their
Right.
backpack somewhere. Drummers with a stick bag. How many kids have that backpack guitar going to ukulele class? So whatever we can do to have music accessible to all of our kids in so many different ways, and we will see not only the band grow, we will see choir continue to grow. If you know what kind of productions that the drama department at the high school is capable of doing.
Oh yeah.
What if we could expand it where we didn't have to pipe in music for that? We had enough kids, enough well-trained teachers that could put together an actual live performing ensemble for those stage productions there. Everyone, and I'm going to step on Lamar Marshall's toes here. You know, I'm my friend Lamar and Hammond. He's always STEM.
Yeah.
That's fine. But look, it needs to be STEAM. We need to put a big A in the middle of that.
Right,
so that creative element of that.
STEM's a good start. We just need to add to it. Add the arts, right?
That's right. Yes.
Lamar's doing great work. I mentioned Sharon Brown Carter earlier. He helped us. She was kind of the original visionary, not the only one, because Lord knows tons of folks helped make Ponchatoula's after school program happen. But it was her idea, and she went to, like with me, the two of us went to Lamar, and he gave us the kind of roadmap on how to get going. So he's great. But you're right. Let's add the arts to that mix. That would be great. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your patience. I've kept you 20 minutes longer than I promised. To our viewers, I see almost all of you that started with us are still here. So thank you for tuning in. This has been the first time we'll have James Square on Ponchatoula Live, but it won't be the last time. We'll book him for a return, and we'll continue where we left off. So, Mr. Square, Papa Square, thank you so much. And to our viewers, we'll see you again next week. Take care.